This is a short demonstration of some tools in Photoshop which are useful for improving architectural photography, especially when using fairly basic equipment. I'm Richard Ellis, an architectural photographer and artist. This is Rob Barlow, a painter who often uses photography as source material. His main subject matter is derelict industrial locations. He has a good eye for composition, and his interest here is to improve his photographs to make them artworks in their own right. We thought the ruined Friargate warehouse near the centre of Derby would make a good subject, with the potential for some very atmospheric images. A couple of notes on equipment. It's good to have a steady tripod. This is a Manfrotto 190. Particularly for taking multiple exposures outdoors in the wind. As a refinement, I sometimes use a geared head, which is good for accurate levelling and composition. Rob's camera is a Canon EOS 550D, which, like most enthusiast level cameras, is cropped frame. The glass on the front is the standard EFS 18 to 55mm kit lens. This shot shows an important tool in this type of photography, which is the bracketing of exposures, which can be very useful in high contrast situations, where, for example, a sky might appear too bright against a building, or a window might be washed out compared to a surrounding interior. Rob took a number of pictures on the day. Of these, I selected this one for processing. It's a good, dynamic composition with some interesting elements such as the sky being visible through the windows where the roof has collapsed, and the remains of what seem to be crane housings. Also, the lens is at minimal focal length, and hence maximum distortion, which will help demonstrate some of the functions of Photoshop to good effect. It's useful to shoot raw images, as they contain far more data than JPEGs, which means there is much more flexibility in changing exposures and so on in processing. Here, I've right-clicked the RAW file and opened it in Photoshop. By the way, I'm using CS6, but most versions have similar functions. The first menu selected is lens correction. This should be done before any cropping. I've selected the Profile tab and checked Enable Lens Correction. Sometimes the camera and lens data come up automatically, but here I had to input the camera make, then the data appeared. That's corrected the spherical aberration of the lens, that is, the barrel effect, which makes rectangles appear to bulge, especially with some wide-angle lenses. By the way, don't worry about the red patch. It shows the highlights clipping indicator is on and will disappear when the highlights are dealt with. Next, I selected the Colour tab and checked Remove Chromatic Aberration. This is the fringing, usually purple or orange, which affects contrasting parts of the edges of images. To see the effect, here is an uncorrected close-up of a window near the edge of the photo. And here it is corrected. Not only have the colour fringes disappeared, but the details are sharper as well. Next, using the Manual tab, I used the Rotate slider to level the image. Because there isn't a specific horizon, and the camera is looking obliquely at the wall, I had to do this by correcting the vertical at the exact centre of the image. A critical aspect of architectural photography is the correction of converging verticals, which can be very obvious with wide-angle lenses. In the real world, our brains correct this defect so we perceive verticals to be so. Here, I've used the vertical slider to do this. I like to think that this gives a photo the same authority as an architect's drawing. One more thing. Look carefully and you'll see that the verticals near the edge still converge slightly. This just looks a bit more natural than pure verticals. Back in the basic menu, I felt the sky was rather washed out. Here, I simply reduced the highlights 100%. It's quite a drastic thing that I wouldn't normally do on a commercial image, but here it's an art photo, so I can get away with it. So, now there's some colour in the sky. To stop the image looking too dull, I used another slider to increase the colour saturation. Well, that's shown a few of the things that can be done in RAW, and now it's time to open the image in the main menu. Firstly, the sky still looks too bright, so I've made a selection of the sky area using the polygonal lasso. I've made a feather of 100 pixels, which will allow a gradual transition. Next, in the image menu, I selected the brightness and contrast tab. Reducing the brightness brings out the more delicate textures in the sky. Having the diagonal line of the selection just below the building line means that there is no bright halo effect around the building, which unfortunately happens too often when bad photoshoppers try to darken skies. The top left corner of the sky still needs to be made darker to balance the composition. Here I've used a broader feather, 300 pixels, for a more gentle graduation of the selected area. The edge can be checked and modified using the Refine Edge tool. Again, the selection is darkened. The broken window apertures now look too bright compared to the sky. So I've used the selection tool again, this time with a smaller 30 pixel feather to pick these out. Going to the Image tab and again clicking on Adjustments, this time I've chosen Shadows and Highlights. This means that I can reduce highlights to darken the bright areas without further darkening the surrounding brickwork. Looking at the image as a whole, I felt it still needed a little more impact, so again I selected brightness and contrast and increased the contrast. Because of the sun being just off the left of the image, some of the left part of the building still looked a little milky. Again, I increased the contrast on a selected area of it. So, that's how we got from this to this. Thanks for watching.